The final battle of the Grand Magic Festival is at hand in episode 7 of Wistoria Wand and Sword, as Will faces off against Julius for the pride of the dwarves. Will, having leaped into the arena and standing face to face with Julius and his teammates, was a crazy place for us to leave off at, but the perfect place to jump back into this battle to find out if Will can stand up against both Julius's team along with his new magic. With that being said, let's spring right into episode 7 of Wistoria Wand and Sword, called 12 Secret Ice Magics, El Glas Frost. Episode 7 starts not on the battlefield of the Grand Magic Festival, but rather with Elfaria in the Wizard's Tower. As Elfie sits by her window, her aide, whose name is Sarissa Elfeld, enters and asks Elfie if she has a moment. As Sarissa gets closer to Elfaria, she realizes that Elfie is asleep and hits her in the head to get her to wake up. Elfie protests being hit by her aide, but Sarissa reminds Elfaria that she has to present herself as a Magia Vander. Sarissa then hands a list of candidates to Elfie that her scouts would like her to consider for the Ice faction. Above all other candidates provided to Elfaria, she was shown Julius Reinberg, the ice wielder about to fight Will. Sarissa suggests, as a warning, that Julius could be powerful enough to be Elfaria's successor. Elfie responds by letting Sarissa know that Julius does look promising and perhaps could be her successor. But to me, it seems like Elfie almost shrugged off the suggestion of Julius succeeding her. Elfie then turns her attention out of her window. From here, episode 7 kicks off right where we left things in episode 6. Will has just leaped into the stadium and stands to face off against Julius and his team. Julius greets Will, letting Will know how much he's been looking forward to disgracing him in front of as many people as he could. But Will lets Julius know that he wouldn't have missed this for anything, and reminds Julius that he will be apologizing to the dwarves. Will refuses to lose. With that being said, Julius begins his attack with a smokescreen. Will wonders what the smokescreen is for, before noting that he can sense his opponent's movements. While wondering about his enemy's movements, Will turns to see a huge block of ice flying directly at him. Will manages to dodge the block of ice and begins running, attempting to identify where the attacks are originating from. After 3 spells have been shot at Will and he identifies where each spell came from, Will jumps into the air towards the location of his first attacker. As some of the smoke shifts and Will sees Julius, he goes in for a final blow, only to be hit with a 4th spell, which completely catches Will off guard since there are only 3 competitors in the arena, and in Will's mind, he's already located them all. As Will looks around and the smoke begins to clear, Julius makes Will aware of the fact that he and his teammates hadn't moved an inch during the whole time that Will was running around and dodging attacks. Now, both Will and the crowd in the stands are completely shocked as the smoke completely clears and they can finally all see that Julius has made 4 copies of himself, all standing on the field between Will and Julius's team. As Will tries to figure out what type of magic Julius used to create these copies of himself, the copies of Julius start to get close to Will and explode. Will is found almost completely encased in ice as the smoke clears from the explosion. Announcer Mike comments on Will being frozen by Julius, as Professor Edward thinks to himself that this is definitely ice magic. Professor Workner continues on with Professor Edward's shock, advising that the magic just used by Julius is a secret art founded by Elfaria, and the magic is called El Glas Frost. Even Rosti, Will's roommate, is in the stands thinking about how he can't figure out how Julius would have even gotten a hold of one of Elfaria's 12 spells. Now, I have no doubt that I'm butchering the name of this spell that Elfaria uses, but please, bear with me. Back on the field, Will, having had a Julius clone explode in his face, and now having been frozen, seems to finally understand what spell this is. Will calls it L1, Ars Vice, and it's a spell that can conjure frigid copies of its caster. Will immediately gets angry while still frozen and screams to Julius to tell him how he is able to use Alfaria's magic. And Julius, cocky as ever, explains to Will that he's just good like that. Julius said that talent and self-study are what got him this far, and he considers himself to be on the road to be on par with the Magiavander. Julius continues boasting, calling Alfaria unimpressive and a fraud. Naturally, this was enough to piss Will off, and Will decided to break free from the ice that Julius placed him in and lunge straight for Julius, telling him to take back what he said about Elfie. Before Will can reach Julius, all of Julius's copies begin to attack Will from all sides, throwing massive ice attacks at him. While Will is cutting through ice attacks, Julius begins explaining in a taunting fashion to Will that the ice copies that he made are able to move how Julius wants them to, along with being able to use magic. Julius's teammates, always thinking of Will as less than them, also start to taunt Will, but Will isn't focused on them because at this moment, he's surrounded by 3 of Julius's copies. While surrounded, Will wonders why none of the 3 copies of Julius are attacking him. But before Will has a chance to think on it for too long, all 3 Julius copies burst into large pillars of blue light before engulfing Will and trapping him in a barrier. As Will attacks the barrier, it's clear to see that the barrier is strong and Will has no way out. At one point, Will's back touched one of the walls of the barrier, and you could see ice crystals forming on his shirt where the barrier grazed him. Will, still desperate to escape the barrier, is then presented with a new and much larger problem, as Julius has created his largest ice attack yet, and it's headed right at Will to finish him off. Will has no time to escape. He's hit from above, seemingly crushed by the ice magic. The crowd is stunned to silence before announcer Mike, overtaken by pure shock and awe, leaps up to yell how amazing of a move it was that Julius just made. Professor Edward also joins in, explaining that a mage winning a fight without having had to take a single step like Julius just did should be the ultimate goal of any mage. And as the crowd continues to stare in stunned silence, Julius decides to create a microphone of sorts out of his wand and speak to everyone. Julius begins to ask the scouts if they're impressed and let them know that he's using Albus Vina Alfaria's magic, before telling the crowd that he will end up being Alfaria's heir. The crowd begins to cheer loudly for Julius, excited by all that he's able to do with Magiavander's magic. Yet in the stands, Rosti can be seen smiling, telling Iris that if Julius were to lose now, he would end up looking pathetic. It is at that very moment that behind Julius, the ice that Will was trapped in begins to crack. Will steps out of the ice as though it were never there to begin with, and thanks Julius for helping him to cool off with the ice before Will beats him. It's honestly the most disrespectful thing that Will said to Julius so far in the series, and I'm here for it. Anyway, Julius and his team, not wasting any time, begin to throw ice spells at Will, but Will's able to evade them. Before Julius's team can figure out where Will went, Will appears behind them. While in mid-air, Will tells Julius that his Ars Vice has room for improvement, before knocking out both of Julius's teammates in one swipe. Will then finds himself face to face with 5 Juliuses. But before Will ever has a chance to attack, all of the Julius clones crumble. And Will points out that Julius was maintaining his clones with the support of his teammates, and that Julius can only briefly use Elfie's magic. Will calls Julius out for not being close to being in Alfaria's league as far as power, and this infuriates Julius. As Julius's rage is reaching new heights, we slip back over to the Wizard's Tower, where we expand upon the conversation Alfaria was having with her aide Sarissa at the beginning of the episode. At the beginning of the episode, Sarissa let Alfaria know that Julius is strong and could very well be her successor. Initially, when we see Alfaria presented with this information, she expresses that Julius does look promising and perhaps could be her successor. But as we expand upon that conversation, Alfaria continues by stating that with those things in mind, she wants to make it known that she isn't looking for a successor. What Alfaria wants more than anything is a lone sword by her side. Now knowing this about Elfie, we're placed back in the stadium, where Will continues to scold Julius, telling him that he has not mastered Archvice, and driving Julius to the peak of his rage. Julius, unwilling to lose at this battle, creates multiple clones to surround Will again, and each clone of Julius creates huge ice attacks above Will. As each attack is thrown at Will, Will manages to evade with next to no effort. Julius, thinking to himself while attacking Will, is frustrated because he knows that what Will said about his magic is the truth. Julius admits that he can only control 4 clones at one time, but takes comfort in the fact that Will has no way of identifying which is the real Julius and which are the copies of him, since Julius has made all of his clones absolutely perfect replicas of himself. And just then, as though Will had heard Julius's thoughts, Will turned toward the true Julius and lunges at him full speed. Julius, caught completely off guard, throws up an ice wall to try to block against Will's attack. However, Will cuts through the ice wall without giving it a second thought, and before Julius can pull himself together, he's gutted by a piece of ice thrown back at him by Will from Julius's own ice wall. Julius, trying to catch his breath, thinks that Will managed to pick out the real Julius by luck or a guess, but Will explains that to Julius that the internal temperature of Archvice is the exact opposite of its caster, so it would be around -36 degrees. And because Julius didn't have perfect control over his creations, the copies of Julius began to leak out cold and form ice at their feet. Julius, seeming to feel the height of his rage towards Will, along with watching his ice copies crumble, asks Will why he knows so much about this spell, since Will can't even cast magic. And Will lets Julius know that Elfie is his childhood friend, and they grew up in an orphanage together. Because of this, Will knows Elfie's magic extremely well, and has studied it. He knows her spells inside and out. Julius can't handle this new information. He can't stand Will, and he tries one more time to attack him. The attack gets Julius nowhere though, and Julius falls to his knees. Will, walking towards Julius, tells Julius that although he is great, the spell that he's using of Alfaria's, well, she came up with that magic when she was 2 years old. Will continues on by letting Julius know that of course a toddler's magic would be flawed. But Julius, still on his knees, seems like he can't even process the information. Julius is thinking to himself that he was beside himself with joy when he finally grasped the spell. But to Lady Alfaria, it's just child's play. This realization causes Julius to snap. Julius begins laughing maniacally before turning all of his fury towards Will. With a gigantic burst of ice magic, Julius creates 8 copies of himself, which is both double the amount of copies that he created in the past, and he's doing so without his teammates' help. And although Julius's attitude is complete trash, considering how much of a leap in power he's showing during this one fight, it's actually pretty impressive. But back to the fight. As Julius, littering the sky with his ice magic, tells Will that he will use his 8 copies to crush Will with sheer force and overwhelming numbers. Too bad for Julius, though, as Will lets him know that as kids, Will was constantly tortured by 10 Elfies. Julius attacks Will anyway, putting everything on the line to make sure he is not beaten. However, Will isn't giving up either. Will begins dodging each of Julius's attacks that come at him, As Will destroys the first of Julius's copies, staring the true Julius down as he does so, you can see a glint of nervousness cross Julius's face. Julius then begins running, telling his copies to stop Will where he is, but they can't. Will is pushing forward, cutting down the copies of Julius one by one as he closes the gap between himself and the true Julius. Will, having cut down all but one of Julius's copies, flings his sword across the stadium, impaling the final copy of Julius. But Will isn't done yet. He continues to race his way to the true Julius, who still happens to be running away. And as Will finally closes the gap between them, Julius opens his mouth and begins to ask Will to wait before Will, without hesitation, punches Julius directly in the face, knocking him smooth across the stadium and completely knocking Julius out cold. The crowd is stunned. The people are shocked, and so am I. That was a crazy fight. 9 Juliuses, the 8 clones and the original, against one Sir Will Surfort. And Will just dominated. For the entire school, the townspeople, and the Tower Scouts to see Will decimate Julius like this, I'll say this is my favorite takedown so far this season. Plus, Julius really deserved it. But back to the episode. After everyone gets over their initial moment of shock, the crowd goes wild. Announcer Mike even calls Will defeating Julius a freaking miracle, as Julius is an elite with over 10,000 credits. As Will tries to catch his breath from his intense battle, Lihana Owenzaus, the lightning wielder and one of the top 3 students in the school, can be seen in the stands, impressed by Will's performance. Announcer Mike can also be heard letting everyone know that now that Will has beaten Julius's team, he has a clear path to the crown and victory in the crown attack. Will simply has to walk over and claim the crown. So Will turns toward the crown to do just that. As Will turns, however, he sees Wignall the Wonder Elf and his team directly in front of the crown. Wignall grabs the crown, lightly mocking both Will and Julius, as Wignall is crowned the victor of the crown attack. As Wignall wins and the world is shocked to its very core at that, and I have to say this one more time, crazy fight, we find our way back to Elfaria and her aide Sarissa in the tower. Elfie begins to question Sarissa on if there are spells that can go back in time, or a spell that can erase one's memories. Sarissa advises Elfie that there aren't any spells like that she would ever allow Elfie to use. But as Sarissa turns to look at Elfaria, she can see that Elfie is in a bit of a panic. Elfie begins to explain that she's freaked out because her past with Will was exposed to the entire school. And Sarissa, clearly exhausted by Elfie shenanigans, just stares at Elfaria. She has nothing to say to the silliness. Finally, we're taken back to the stadium, where, although Will didn't win, he's still sitting in the center of the stadium as the celebration commences. Colette runs over to Will, making sure her friend is okay. And although Will didn't win the entire competition, he's at peace, completely content in knowing that he defeated Julius and defended the pride of the dwarves. This is where episode 7 of Wistoria, Wand and Sword ends. Just throwing in my thoughts, but I felt like this episode was absolutely peak. The entire Grand Magic Festival arc was amazing, with Will so focused on defeating Julius that he didn't care what anyone else was saying. Scion losing his mind and attacking his own teammate just to get Will's attention, and I guess inevitably become his rival. But especially this fight, where Will just embarrasses Julius. I truly smiled so hard watching Will completely decimate every last one of Julius's copies. And Julius's pride. But all in all, If future episodes are as crazy as episode 7 was, this series will continue to stay as one of my current favorites. So if you enjoyed this recap, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you all for episode 8.